This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. A reading from A Course in Miracles, Chapter 11, God or the Ego, Section 5, The Dynamics of the Ego. Paragraph 1. No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. There's no need to shrink from illusions, for they cannot be dangerous. We are ready to look more closely at the ego's thought system because together we have the lamp that will dispel it. And since you realize you do not want it, you must be ready. Let us be very calm in doing this, for we are merely looking honestly for truth. The quote, dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it, since you have made it real. We will undo this error quietly together, and then look beyond it to truth. Paragraph 2. What is healing but the removal of all that stands in the way of knowledge? And how else can one dispel illusions except by looking at them directly, without protecting them? Be not afraid, therefore, for what you will be looking at is the source of fear, and you're beginning to learn that fear is not real. You're also learning that its effects can be dispelled merely by denying their reality. The next step is obviously to recognize that what has no effects does not exist. Laws do not operate in a vacuum, and what leads to nothing has not happened. If reality is recognized by its extension, what leads to nothing could not be real. Do not be afraid, then, to look upon fear, for it cannot be seen. Clarity undoes confusion by definition, and to look upon darkness through light must dispel it. Paragraph 3. Let us begin this lesson in, quote, ego dynamics by understanding that the term itself does not mean anything. It contains the very contradiction in terms that makes it meaningless. Dynamics implies the power to do something, and the whole separation fallacy lies in the belief that the ego has the power to do anything. The ego is fearful to you because you believe this. Yet the truth is very simple. All power is of God. What is not of him has no power to do anything.
The Course addresses the ego from a higher level than the one that we exist in. And that makes it so that all of this is a little bit like jumping outside of a dream and then hearing someone tell us that that dream isn't real, when in fact our experience is absolutely that the dream has an inner integrity that makes that dream go on and on. As I told Joanna earlier today, some people are in a coma for, let's say, 11 years. It's possible that they're dreaming that whole time. A dream has nothing in it that will wake you up. There's nothing inside of a dream. And when we do wake up from a dream because it's a nightmare or something scary happens, according to Freud or Jung, I think that they say that that's a failure of the dream, that the purpose of the dream is to keep you asleep. The inner coherence of it and the purposefulness of what's happening inside the dream is meant to keep us asleep, whether it's to keep us from going to the bathroom or to keep a sound that's a clicking noise. These things get incorporated into the dream, even though they're happening from outside of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
if you hear rain on the roof, it gets incorporated into maybe the sound of tires on a road or something, but it gets incorporated into the dream.
Right. And yet, as awaking and sleeping biological within the illusion, obviously there's a mechanism that wakes me up into the next, what I think is my real world, but it's actually still, the Course says you're still waking up into the dream.
Okay, but what wakes you up?
What wakes me up?
Out of your sleep, what wakes you up?
Sometimes it's a light. Sometimes I have to go to the bathroom.
We're diurnal. We're awake some and we're asleep some.
Right.
So you wake up when there's any cue.
Right, exactly.
From the outside to wake up, because that's the kind of creature we are.
Right.
But using that as a metaphor or as an analogy for this, my point of view is that the Course has no power to wake me up because I will incorporate it into my dream.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, that's quite possible. All we can do is follow its methods, and hopefully that will cause an inner movement towards the God self as opposed to my ego self, so that I will slowly awaken. The Course is very, it's a boiling frog, as you would say, the boiling frog effect. In other words, as you start to experience some experiences of more peace, more joy, more relaxation in your life, less turbulence, there's a desire to continue to do it. But also, I did want to address in the earlier paragraphs that you have to face what the ego is up to. And I know that we had that discussion before, that you have to see how your own ego is running you around. And there is a way to know, and usually it's that if I'm in any anxiety, any fear at all, you can just do an inner check. If I am upset about anything, is there something that is, making me ruminate? Well, then I am in my ego, And so it's not like for me, I don't feel like I have to do a deep analysis, and yet it's good to know when you get thrown off. I often get thrown off on any type of time crunch at all. If it seems like I'm supposed to be somewhere and I can't, I seem to be behind, and that's also an ego ploy of mine. I'm always a little bit late. That I immediately am in that little bit of anxiety, immediately running around, trying to grab last things to get out the door.
The movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, they made sure to carry a little top with them into the dream.
Oh, yeah.
And they would spin this top to be able to tell, because the top behaves in a certain way in quote-unquote real life.
Yeah, it'll eventually stop.
Right.
And in the dream, it keeps going.
And in the dream, it keeps going. Well, it ends up, of course, the movie has some stuff in it to where maybe he was always in the dream throughout the entire movie, whether the top was working or not. But I'm going to say that the Course in Miracles provides that top, and that little top that we have to know that we're in a dream, supposedly, is that I get upset. Yeah. That's it. It's just that simple. If I get upset about anything, and I can say from, easy, direct personal experience, that when I get upset about something, it always seems totally coherent.
Absolutely.
I incorporate the upset into the dream. Well, I got upset because of the wrench didn't work right, or I got upset because somebody did something I didn't want them to, or I got upset because I'm not the person I thought I was, or I incorporate it in to the dream, the upset, and then I deal with it within the dream. Mm-hmm. So I was. This is actually the second time we've done this chapter, and it's a long chapter. And the reason is because my voice was spiking in the last one, because I take this really, really seriously. And there's a dreadful aspect to me, which is not the power of the ego. It's like, as the Course says, a dream is a dream is a dream. Mm-hmm. Nothing's happening in the dream. That's fine. However, tell a person who's in a coma, or tell a person who doesn't want to wake up that they should get out of the dream. It's hopeless. It's hopeless. It relies on the willingness of a person to get out, and that has to do with a clear perception that this doesn't work correctly, doesn't work well. So in a weird way, the better we get our lives to work, the more peaceful we are, the more gentle we are, there's less impetus to escape from the dream. And someone could argue that, well, you have escape from the dream because you're peaceful and you're gentle and you do good things.
Well, you always know when, somebody comes at your door and wants something from you that you weren't expecting, or the bombs start flying overhead, or suddenly there's no water coming into your house and the power shut off. Those are the times when you find out whether or not your ego is still running you.
Well, so it says all power is of God. What is not of him has no power to do anything. Well, whatever power the ego exercises, and the Course says this, whatever our experience of the ego is, it's borrowed power from God. That's why it has such inner coherence. That's why the dream can keep you asleep. You wouldn't be able to sleep through a dream if it was one nightmare after another, or if it was one nonsensical thing after another. There's an inner coherence to the dream that keeps us happily dreaming. There seems to be, we're going somewhere, it seems.
Right.
And we're never upset of the illogic.
Right.
That the car's tires spin endlessly in place, or that my car turns into a bicycle.
Right.
It doesn't bother me. And that's how this life is. We're able to incorporate all kinds of nonsense in and not wake up from the dream and not say I have a higher reality. So even though the ego is powerless and all that kind of stuff, and the Course makes it's almost, the ego is almost a foe.
Well, it's powerless to change the eternal self.
That's fine, but so what?
Well,
what? The dream doesn't change my physical functioning. It doesn't really have that much of a role. So, hey, dream on.
Right.
Dream on.
Right. But we can recognize, that this world is constructed, for me, it's constructed out of problems and solutions. Some of the fear-based ideas that come up is like, well, we just need to figure out a solution to that now, don't we? And so there's always this sense of fixing things.
Well, that's the beauty. Okay. And this one thing I mentioned earlier, and this is one thing that frightens me about the topic. Really. Okay. Frightens. I know it's a dirty word, but damn it, I'm going to use it.
Okay.
It frightens me. Is that within this so-called egoic dream that we're in, whatever you want to call it, the ego's delusion, we dedicate ourselves to problem solving.
Absolutely.
And the better we get at it, the deeper the dream.
I would say that's true.
So that's the frightening part that I want to bring up is, thus enters the car wreck.
Yeah.
Thus enters cancer. It wakes us up, or has the potential to wake us up, where we're finally on our knees and praying to some God that we don't believe in to get us out of here, Mr. Wizard. Get me out. Paragraph 4. When we look at the ego, then, we are not considering dynamics, but delusions. You can surely regard a delusional system without fear, for it cannot have any effects if its source is not real. Fear becomes more obviously inappropriate if you recognize the ego's goal, which is so clearly senseless that any effort on its behalf is necessarily expended on nothing. The ego's goal is quite explicitly ego autonomy. From the beginning, then, its purpose is to be separate, sufficient unto itself, and independent of any power except its own. That is why it is the symbol of separation. Okay. The dream's function is to keep you dreaming.
Right.
There's nothing in the dream that will wake you up. There's nothing in the ego's thought system that will wake you up. And if the Course in Miracles becomes a piece, an element within my dream.
Yeah, that says I'm doing something. I'm solving my problems.
Yeah. I'm getting holy. I'm going towards God. It can be a serious, a way to stay asleep.
Yeah.
It can be. I'm just saying.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to read paragraph 5. Every idea has a purpose. and its purpose is always the natural outcome of what it is. Everything that stems from the ego is the natural outcome of its central belief. And the way to undo its results is merely to recognize that their source is not natural, being out of accord with your true nature. I said before that to will contrary to God is wishful thinking and not real willing. His will is one, because the extension of his will cannot be unlike itself. The real conflict you experience then is between the ego's idle wishes and the will of God, which you share. Can this be a real conflict?
Yeah. So is there a goal? Is there any goal here whatsoever?
Well, the Course has so many different, sayings like, let me recognize the problem so that it can be solved. Or to recognize that it's already been solved, I think is one of them also. And then, can this be a real conflict? Well, the conflict is when I am going to side with my wishful thinking and my autonomous self versus saying, I want to know my oneness that is eternal and can never be changed.
But we do that moment by moment in every single day.
Yeah.
Every action
Absolutely.
is to reinforce exactly what you're saying is the goal of the Course, to undo.
Yeah, it is to undo.
So what's the goal? What's the goal of doing the Course? And what's the goal of regular life? What's the goal? Is there anything to be explored in understanding the purposes of doing a Course in Miracles as a means of, let's say, waking up or becoming aware of the ego?
Well, I think so, because if I can recognize that I'm reacting to my world off of fear-based thoughts, and that these fear-based thoughts, so long as I want to join with them, with the world, with the agenda of the world that's going to come on my flat screen TV or wherever it is on your flat screen device that you hold in your hand, then I actually increase the veil of darkness on the sonship. By joining with it, I actually help to keep it darkened.
Okay, I think you answered my question.
And so if I say I'm not going to join that thought, I'm going to stay removed, I'm going to be the observer of what's going on around me and not become the internal churning reaction. If I can begin to have a little bit more control over, I do not have to react to this. I don't have to. I can watch it and have an observer's eyes and see, is there anything I can do? Maybe not. I can contemplate it.
So you answered my question. I'll put it this way, is how I understand it right now. The purpose for me to do the Course in Miracles and to take it seriously is to make the dream more pleasant.
It is, because
that's the happy dream.
Yeah, because it says that we won't wake up from the nightmare and just go into the I'm one with God. It's just, it requires us to, first of all, desire the happy dream. By practicing this, it begins to alter our individual reality at first, and then we don't know how the extension trickles out to the rest of the sonship.
So I should not be tricked by the sophistication of the Course and the fact that it seems to have a source from outside of the dream. In other words, calling me to wake up from the dream. I shouldn't be tricked into thinking that this has to do with escaping from the dream. This has to do with improving the quality of this dream according to the mind of God, the way that God thinks for me, but I'm still deeply immersed in the dream. And I can recognize that I'm in the unhappy dream or a nightmare because I'm upset, because I'm projecting onto others. So, in a sense, the Course in Miracles is good psychotherapy.
Absolutely. And we cannot awaken to the truth of who we are until we begin to have those witnesses of the happy dream starting to appear in our lives. And we start to see the effect of the way that we are being by being less reactionary, by being more of a peaceful countenance. And this is not a forced, peaceful countenance, but I've seen people, I'm peaceful, and they're not. I mean, so when you're carrying yourself in the world and you're less reactive to it, you seem to things seem to flow better.
No, that's easy. Don't sweat the small stuff. There's about 1 million books on how to improve the quality of your life.
Absolutely.
And I would say that according to what we're discussing right now, I have to put the Course in Miracles in the same category.
And it's really, really important. The Course says you have mighty companions that go with you. If that helps to say it's Jesus Christ, if that helps to say that's my guardian angel, if that helps, whatever it is that seems still to be separate from me, then that's the point, is that there have been others that have gone before me and mastered this, and they are my brothers on the path, encouraging me. And whenever I make a movement by my little willingness towards that effort, then these mighty companions come in. We just had All Saints Day.
So it's also to incorporate into the dream a sense that there are others outside of the dream. That's called religion. That there are someone outside the dream. We just saw a woman that does nothing but study the gods and goddesses, or call it the communion of saints, and she claims to be an atheist, and all she does is study this stuff.
The deities.
So she studies all the deities that are these entities from outside the dream. But she's convinced that they're all inside the dream. And my question would be, does it matter? Okay? Right? If she's studying them, she's studying them. So she labels herself an atheist anyway. Paragraph 6. Yours is the independence of creation, not of autonomy. Your whole creative function lies in your complete dependence on God, whose function he shares with you. By his willingness to share it, he became as dependent on you as you are on him. Do not ascribe the ego's arrogance to him who wills not to be independent of you. He has included you in his autonomy. Can you believe that autonomy is meaningful apart from him? The belief in ego autonomy is costing you the knowledge of your dependence on God, in which your freedom lies. The ego sees all dependency as threatening, and has twisted even your longing for God into a means of establishing itself. But do not be deceived by its interpretation of your conflict. So God is as dependent on me as I am on him. So again, outside of the dream, there's God. Now, I am God, and the Course is telling me, no, God's not outside the dream. God, in a sense, is dreaming. I mean, it's the ego is dreaming a dream, but there is the spark of God
everywhere
that is continuously awake. So we've got this metaphysical thing of saying, no, something's outside of you. And then the Course says, well, I know I've talked to you about this thing that's outside of you that has the power to lift you out and give you meaning and purpose. But you know what? It's really you.
Yeah. I kind of look at it like I've put either a giant lampshade over myself. It's the bushel basket over my spark. And by doing the Course, I'm either got a little penknife or something, and I'm putting little holes in that thing that allows the God to reach in to my spark, and the communication starts to become more solid. And the more I stab at that, that veil that I put over, which means I'm not joining the dark veil anymore. I'm not joining that idea of constant fear. That it literally puts holes in that little dome that I put over myself, which is my ego's world. And it allows for the communication between God and me to be reunited. So that's why God can sense when, they call about that he's incomplete without me. He is everything, so he can't be incomplete. But to my understanding, he can sense when a part of itself has pretended to be not a part of him. And so he desires that reunification. It's a reunion of me with the self that knows itself and God with me. So it seems like it's a separation and then a rejoining, but it's always just minds cutting off themselves from the truth and then having to decide that they want the truth. And again, I poke holes in that little veil I've put over myself every time you do a lesson. Paragraph 7. The ego always attacks on behalf of separation. Believing it has the power to do this, it does nothing else, because its goal of autonomy is nothing else. The ego is totally confused about reality, but it does not lose sight of its goal. It is much more vigilant than you are because it is perfectly certain of its purpose. You are confused because you do not recognize yours.
Okay, so the ego does have a goal, and the goal is autonomy, and
which keeps it separate.
But God has a goal as well, and His goal is also autonomy. God is completely autonomous.
Well, it's not a goal; it's what it is.
Right. Well, okay. Then the self waking up in the dream has to come to a point of recognizing that dependence on God is necessary for the larger autonomy that is God.
Yeah, to be recognized.
So the ego picks up on that and says, no, I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm going to be autonomous all by myself. And so the Course is differentiating between God's autonomy and the ego's autonomy. The ego's autonomy is a false autonomy. It's Jesus's metaphor of I am the vine and you are the branches. If you cut off a branch, it can have no life in it apart from me. So in that sense, it's identical to that. We're saying that God wants me being a branch, the me, the local self. God wants this branch to be attached to Him. Why? Because He is, let's say, the olive or the grapevine. He's the grapevine.
Yeah, there can be no fruit.
There can be no fruit, and a tree that's pruned away down to a trunk, by way of, it's great. It's still alive. It's powerful. Does a lot of things, but it's not the tree that we think it is. And so God is saying, I require you all branches to be part of my reality. Okay, my reality is a wholeness of the tree. I depend on branches. I depend on fruit. I depend on those seasonal changes in you to be whole.
Yeah.
And the ego is saying, okay, well, so I'm going to be a branch and I'm going to do my thing all by myself. So so again and again, it helps me to see A Course in Miracles as more psychotherapeutic than of an absolute teaching that's trying to wake me up in an ultimate kind of a way. It helps because, again, that's why I jettisoned the last thing.
And it's at the very last sentence, I just wanted to cover that, is that you are confused because you do not recognize your purpose. And the Course has many ways of explaining what your true purpose is, and it comes in the form of functions, the function to forgive, your function is true happiness. I guess that's the will. Actually, the will and function are sometimes the same. And so at any rate, the function is to see your brother as yourself. All of those are our purpose ultimately is to awaken the sonship by awakening ourselves. That's, I think, what it is.
Paragraph 8. You must recognize that the last thing the ego wishes you to realize is that you are afraid of it. For if the ego could give rise to fear, it would diminish your independence and weaken your power. Yet its one claim to your allegiance is that it can give power to you. Without this belief, you would not listen to it at all. How then can its existence continue if you realize that, by accepting it, you are belittling yourself and depriving yourself of power? Now, there's an assumption here. You must recognize the last thing ego wants you to know is that you are afraid of the ego. Well, okay. It didn't.
Who is afraid of the ego?
Me.
Okay.
Me. I'm the local self. I'm in a dream. I have, there's a structure called an ego that has a lot of inner coherence, which keeps me asleep in the dream.
Okay.
But that I fear this structure. I fear the egoic structure. And that's the last thing the ego wants me to know. You'll have to say something about that. I have to think on my feet on that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. All the things that we strive for in a body-centric world, whether it's to become stronger, and then we go out to the gym and we're working out and look at my muscles and and you become that, or if it's you're striving because you're taking more classes and you're gonna, now you're gonna get your doctorate, and now you're gonna become a doctor and you're a professor, or whatever the strivings and goals are. The ego gives you a sense of power in your individuated thing that you do. Any what we call a creative endeavor. It could be, something more typical like artwork and everything else. Or it could be building your own house. Those are all creative endeavors. And the ego's always there to say, hey, look at me. Look what I did. And there's no sense that there's any fear-based thought that is generating the goals to make myself purposeful in my life. What do you think of that?
No, that's true. I mean, you got to think about it, because it says, for if the ego could give rise to fear, which sounds to me like the ego cannot give rise to fear. Mm-hmm. The ego itself, no one is afraid of their own sense of I.
Right.
No one's afraid of their own desire to achieve. No one's afraid of their own sort of longing for a kind of autonomy or independence. Mm-hmm. No one's afraid of any of this.
Right.
The ego can't, in other words, the ego wisely within itself, as I said, there's an inner coherence. The ego would go away immediately if we were afraid of it. That's what it's saying. It's a structure that I live my entire life by in this dream. I live my entire life by the egoic structure. And it doesn't make me afraid. And the only way to improve, we decided that the course is psychotherapeutic. Mm-hmm. The only way to improve my experience in the world is to recognize that, in fact, I ought to be afraid of the egoic structure.
So my understanding is that you need to shine a light on in the internal structure of what the ego is up to. In other words, as I become aware of how I'm being run by this thing that says it doesn't give rise to fear, and yet my fears, it feeds off of my fears. It's what helps keep the dream going. So if I can see how I'm being triggered, and then I can allay that. I can decrease that particular reaction.
No, the ego's purpose is to generate fear.
It is to generate fear.
So it's not a sideline occupation of the ego. The ego functions through fear.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is, if I knew that that's what it was up to, then I would be wanting to make more conscious effort to notice when I'm having those reactions of fear-based thought, and is there really anything wrong in this moment? A lot of times, anxieties and fears, there's nothing that is actually, I'm not really vulnerable in the moment, but it seems like it in my mind. Even minor things can set off fear-based thoughts. And if I can recognize that, then I can decrease the power hold on me that those things have. But the other thing that it has to say is that I believe it can give me power. I believe that I need my ego to have power in the world, power to express myself, power to create a beautiful bouquet, which I like to do. The power to do things in the world that get recognition, that get, some kind of kudos and things like that. Or to just be the opposite. Power to, fall over in my slump of depression and leave me alone and let the world go by. I mean, all of those seem like I have power. And the ego is saying that I have power.
Well, that fear in our world, that fear is the spice of life. Okay,
I know.
the fear of being rejected because of you put all that effort into the yard. It's not enough that you create beauty. No, you want to be recognized for it, and that wanting to be recognized has as a downside that people could reject it, and you're a failure, and that prods you on to do better next time for them. That's the engine of this. It's a sort of is a stage of enlightenment to where chop wood, carry water, to where you just do what you do because it's there to be done, and there's no other motivation.
Right.
But that seems boring to us.
Right. Paragraph 9. The ego can and does allow you to regard yourself as supercilious, unbelieving, lighthearted, distant, emotionally shallow, callous, uninvolved, and even desperate, but not really afraid. Minimizing fear, but not its undoing, is the ego's constant effort, and is indeed a skill at which it is very ingenious. How can it preach separation without upholding it through fear? And would you listen to it if you recognized this is what it is doing? We should have read that one ahead of time because we kind of covered all of that.
Right. Yeah. So the ego, it allows me to believe that I'm sort of wispy. I'm a lightweight, but not and even desperate for things. But it won't allow me to see the existential fear that drives me, and that existential fear comes up at those moments with the cancer, with the car wreck, with the job failure, with the family failure.
And those are big things. I mean, like I said, I can get triggered just because I'm late for something. They're
revealed. Oh, I know. I mean, the one time when I was going to go visit my daughter in Bend, and I was incredibly invested in showing up for her as her dad, and the things we were going through in our family as our family was like falling apart. And so it became very amped up, and it was an irrational attachment I had to delivering it. If I was 15 minutes late out the door to make the drive across the Cascades, I was a lunatic. One time I was an hour too late. I was absolutely a lunatic. Picture the fetal ball in the shower crying, trying to get a grip on itself.
That's what I mean. I mean, we make things up as if they are major things, and yet that if we really had a moment to just stop ourselves and check in and say, is anybody going to be upset or hurt or anything else?
Again, the checking in thing, like you're saying, that it's something I've mentioned about the Course before. It would be nice if there was a big picture of Jesus in the front. I'm just saying, because you can supply your own picture of Jesus or whatever saint or the 7 rays or whatever image you want to attach to the Course in Miracles. We seem to do better if we have a visible friend.
Absolutely.
To help us deal with the meltdown, because it is hard for me to deal with the meltdown by myself. That's the beauty of Catholicism, is that they populate your world with the community of saints and Jesus and Mary and St. Joseph and all these other people. And so if a person is somewhat agnostic and they're trying to do the Course and they're staying away from the God thing, it seems to me that there still needs to be an anchor that I attach myself onto when I'm losing it. When the ego's world is, I'm absorbed in fear. There's an ironic ecology at work in the ego, to where the more reinforced I get within the ego, the greater my fear, or the greater my anger, the greater my projections, whatever, I'm collapsing in, the lesser and lesser is my ability to reach out to or for anything.
Right. And
it's the opposite.
And it almost blocks it from your awareness that you can even do that. So, I mean, I totally understand that. And as you said, while we're still occupying our minds in the dreamscape, I find it personally helpful to have, the companion of Jesus as my go-to. Everyone can have something else. And for those who are more agnostic and things like that, to recognize that being able to visualize another, because we are experiencing our world as separate beings and everything else.
We need a talisman.
Yeah,
it's just that simple.
It's just that simple.
Human being requires some sort of talisman. It can be a lucky rock. It can be a person's face. It can be mom and dad, uncle, Ned.
Yeah, it really helps to have that sense that I'm going along with an energy that can help carry me through anything,
right. Paragraph 10. Your recognition that whatever seems to separate you from God is only fear, regardless of the form it takes and quite apart from how the ego wants you to experience it, is therefore the basic ego threat. Its dream of autonomy is shaken to its foundation by this awareness. For though you may countenance a false idea of independence, you will not accept the cost of fear if you recognize it. Yet this is the cost, and the ego cannot minimize it. If you overlook love, you are overlooking yourself, and you must fear unreality because you have denied yourself. By believing that you have successfully attacked truth, you are believing that attack has power. Very simply, then, you have become afraid of yourself, and no one wants to find what he believes would destroy him.
Yeah, I know. That's the irony of it, that I've become afraid of myself. The true self that is always carried through everything and does not diminish and does not go away and is perfectly safe. And the Course uses the sense of safety a lot, that if you would recognize that you've never left God, and God has never left you, you'd sense this safety, this peace that comes with that safety. Your recognition that whatever seems to separate you from God is only fear, regardless of its forms it takes, and quite apart from how the ego wants you to experience it, is therefore the basic ego threat.
So the basic ego threat, or the threat to the ego, it's not the threat from the ego. It's the ego. The ego feels extremely threatened by the idea that the cover has been blown, and I realize that what separates me from full immersion in the happy dream is fear.
Yeah.
And that fear is out of the ego factory.
Okay, yeah.
So if I have a clear picture of the ego factory being a mechanism that creates fear to generate this sense of autonomy within the dream, if I reckon the dream, the ego won't let me recognize that. That's why, like in a dream, getting a terminal illness, having an accident, seeing another car heading right at you for a head-on, or losing a loved one, these things wake you up from the dream. They wake you up from this world's dream, in a sense. And that's why one of my meditations on this whole thing is, there's got to be a better way, huh? I mean, do I have to go through the steamroller event, or can I? A lot of people no. I mean, I've just had to accept that for most people, they will not learn within this world system.
Right.
I'm among them.
Well, and some steamroller events like major wars and things like that only create PTSD in people, and it doesn't awaken them. It just makes the world seem that more fearful.
No, it's not an efficient, it's not an ironclad, it's not a solid, guaranteed way that you're going to wake up.
No,
it's just that
not at all.
seems to be an aspect of many wake-up stories.
Right. Paragraph 11. If the ego's goal of autonomy could be accomplished, God's purpose could be defeated, and this is impossible. Only by learning what fear is can you finally learn to distinguish the possible from the impossible and the false from the true. According to the ego's teaching, its goal can be accomplished and God's purpose cannot. According to the Holy Spirit's teaching, only God's purpose can be accomplished, and it is accomplished already.
And in the version of this talk that we gave several days ago, and that I did not publish, I didn't put it out there, I said that my world here is a little bit like a prepper. I'm well prepared. I have my backpack. I have the items that I need for my trip, whether it's a knife or an energy bar, a rucksack, or whatever it is I've got in that backpack. Mm-hmm. And that's solid assistance. That's solid help. That really helps me. That's the ego's world, to prepare and to be ready for whatever situation you might find yourself in. And God's plan is more like blue sky, sunshine, rainy day. In other words, I seem to have no control over God's design. And so this whole thing about the ego's goal of autonomy can be accomplished. God's purpose could be defeated. This is impossible. The fact is, in this world, I feel much more solid with my backpack than I do relying on that. So this is the transfer. It's a very qualitative shift in trusting the unfolding of things unseen. I mean, it's by definition faith.
It is by definition faith. I agree.
And not the backpack. Because the other side of it is, like Luke going into the cave in whatever Star Wars episode that was, Luke, you will find in there what you go in with. Mm-hmm. So he goes in with his lightsaber because he needed to protect himself. Well, he ended up in a battle to the death with his father, but actually it was his own self in that particular episode. He ends up beheading the enemy, but it's him. Mm-hmm. So Yoda is telling him that you are going to meet what you go in with. And I'm going to say that if I insist on having my backpack, I've already decided how I'm going to deal with this world.
Right.
If I trust Prudential, if I trust the bank, if I trust my relationship, if I trust my health, and I've got all of these different techniques, I've already made my decision.
Right.
It's very, very difficult. And then I can include in my backpack, as I said, a copy of the Course in Miracles, a copy of wise sayings. But I've already decided how I'm going to live my life. It's with the backpack.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great example right there.
Paragraph 12. God is as dependent on you as you are on him, because his autonomy encompasses yours and is therefore incomplete without it. You can only establish your autonomy by identifying with him and fulfilling your function as it exists in truth. The ego believes that to accomplish its goal is happiness, but it is given you to know that God's function is yours, and happiness cannot be found apart from your joint will. Recognize only that the ego's goal, which you have pursued so diligently, has merely brought you fear, and it becomes difficult to maintain that fear is happiness. Upheld by fear, this is what the ego would have you believe. Yet God's Son is not insane and cannot believe it. Let him but recognize it, and he will not accept it. For only the insane would choose fear in place of love, and only the insane could believe that love can be gained by attack. But the sane realize that only attack could produce fear, from which the love of God completely protects them. So the whole concept of fear being happiness, or attack being a strategy to achieve love, again, of course, as an ego, you don't recognize it that way. That fear and insecurity is what leads me to my best hope for success and love. That fear and insecurity and attack is what leads me to any form of success in the ego's world. I'm not allowed to notice that, in a sense, preparing for the interview, preparing for the beauty contest, preparing for whatever it is I'm preparing for, the trip across the country, preparing for these things is always masked fear. It's fear in a certain sort of a guise.
Right. Because there's always this sense of, what if I don't bring this, or what if I don't have that, as if, I won't be prepared and I won't have whatever's necessary. Also in this, because there's a real live war going on in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel, and maybe escalating, that this idea that one side or the other will be happy once the other side has been subdued or removed from the planet, basically, is absolute insanity and craziness. I mean, to me, this is a blow up of a live action play that we can watch from a distance over here so far to see that how can this particular conflict result in anything positive if all they're going to do is keep bombing each other and then inviting more in to bomb each other.
The thing is, the whole conversation about how can this be and how insane it is, war and whatnot.
Well, I mean, it's just an outpicturing of how the ego works is what I'm saying.
I know, but let's get into it.
Okay.
Because, from the point of view, the idea in any situation is to create an absolute existential crisis. Mm-hmm. In other words, as long as that other person exists, my life, my well-being is threatened.
Right.
Both sides have that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're in a room with someone who's a psychopathological nut, and that there's no way out, that you're trapped in that room with that person, mm-hmm. It's easy to go to the point of saying that if that person were non-existent, I would have no problem.
Yeah, right.
So so that it's important in the ego's world, but just say our world. Let's just call it. It's our world. It's
mm-hmm.
The one that we live in, is to create evil. Mm-hmm. We create a basket called evil. Mm-hmm. Adolf Hitler, and
mm-hmm.
then more recently Donald Trump, of all people.
And don't forget Putin.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And Putin is in our world is to identify the massive ego, the massive evil mm-hmm. that we have to deal with. And so in the war right now between what's going on with Israel and Palestine in this situation, you realize that this is just an engine. The engine of creating enemies and watching them slaughter one another is an engine for something else.
And it's to get everyone who's watching from very far away to choose a side, as if you're going to go to a football game and say, my team's going to win.
Well, until we get to a point, okay, using that as a macrocosm, until we get to a point to where we see the need to create, to choose, the need to make hard choices, the need to identify the victims and the need to identify the perpetrators of the problem, until we see that engine happening and say, I reject it. Mm-hmm. I reject this process. I will not choose a side. I will not choose a side. Right. That's what we have to do individually first, apparently, because it's going to persist. But it will persist in the collective until enough people just say, I'm not choosing a side.
That's paragraph 13. The ego analyzes. The Holy Spirit accepts. The appreciation of wholeness comes only through acceptance. For to analyze means to break down or to separate out. The attempt to understand totality by breaking it down is clearly the characteristically contradictory approach of the ego to everything. The ego believes that power, understanding, and truth lie in separation. And to establish this belief, it must attack. Unaware that the belief cannot be established and obsessed with the conviction that separation is salvation, the ego attacks everything it perceives by breaking it into small, disconnected parts without meaningful relationships and therefore without meaning. The ego will always substitute chaos for meaning. For if separation is salvation, harmony is threat.
There's an irony with this whole idea about breaking things into pieces or analysis, because, give you an example in the realm of Rolfing. Mm-hmm. The problem with the body is that the fascia sticks, and then the muscles, individual muscle groups, then rub against each other, and it creates an awkward solidity in the body. The body tends to crystallize or calcify, And so that the rolfer is actually there to free up individual muscles. In other words, bust them apart, break them apart from each other so that the individual fibers and then the individual muscle groups can operate independently.
Yeah, they slide over each
as
other.
they're supposed to. So this would be parallel to what it's saying that is the ego's function, to create separation, to create autonomy. So
it's afraid of harmony, which Rolfing is set to create harmony in the body.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying that because we're in a situation here of, if I turn the ego into Adolf Hitler and say ego must be ended, this kind of thing, then we will all be better off when finally the Sith Lord ego is dispensed with, like this. If I don't recognize that the ego is actually a mechanism that call it a perversion or a twisting or an amplification or a misperception of a mechanism within the dual system of the local self that's necessary for healthy functioning. Parents and children should not fuse together into one ego mass. The muscles in my body should not fuse. We're not talking about fusion into the mind of God. I'm talking about me becoming more myself, understanding what Phil Hamilton is, what his Swadharma is, what his purpose is here as an individual, as separate from others, operating not independently like a demigod or like a little god in my world, but operating in consort with others who are also identifying what they are. The lawnmower won't work if the blade and the pull cord are fused together. They have to be separate from each other. So there's an aspect of things having their own individual autonomy that's extremely healthy and necessary in this world. And sometimes if I take the Course in Miracles symbolically, and I read into it, undifferentiated ego mass equals God. We're all supposed to be together on this thing. You had that with your old partner.
Oh, yeah.
Aren't we together on this thing?
Yeah.
With no respect for your way of dealing with the world, which is all yours and only yours, and it's not fused in the coupling of the purple flame partnership.
Right. Well, and that's, egos cannot, because they're based on fear-based thought, egos cannot share. That's just it. There is a distinction between when I am truly sharing with another, which means extension has happened, which includes, as we've said, the extension of the God attributes that are naturally my inheritance, not the ego, which is the extension of something that a lot of times is not even necessarily conscious by me. It's the extension of peace or joy or something. There is, as you would say, a cautionary aspect of applying, the Course to the point where, well, what the heck am I ever doing anyway? Why would I do anything?
Well, here it says, the ego believes that power, understanding, and truth lie in separation, and to establish this belief, it must attack. So this is where the distortion is. Power, in terms of Rolfing or these other things I mentioned, the lawnmower engine, the power and the understanding and truth is in the interconnected, holistic functioning of the entire mechanism.
Right.
So for that mechanism to function, there has to be a separation of the parts. The ego takes that awareness of the separation of the parts and says, the power's in the separation. So the ego has confused power with utility. In other words, we have utility through separation, but not power. We have utility through separation. In other words, things work because of separation. But the power is in things working together, not being isolated.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, paragraph 14. The ego's interpretations of the laws of perception are, and would have to be, the exact opposite of the Holy Spirit's. The ego focuses on error and overlooks truth. It makes real every mistake it perceives, and with characteristically circular reasoning concludes that because of the mistake, consistent truth must be meaningless. The next step, then, is obvious. If consistent truth is meaningless, inconsistency must be true. Holding error clearly in mind and protecting what it has made real, the ego proceeds to the next step in its thought system. Error is real, and truth is error. So this is a very interesting meditation that we actually, I don't know, I can see this clearly. I feel like I'm having an argument in this paragraph. I'm having a conversation with a cynical agnostic about the nature of the world. That things are going to fail. Things are going to break down.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. You design that into the system. Things break. That's how it works. It's people that say, it's necessary for me to work with organized crime in order to achieve a charitable organization.
Everything has an opposite here. And so the inconsistency must be true because there's nothing, quote, in the ego's mind, there's nothing holistic here. Look at,
So in other words, if you take the American Cancer Society, which is created in order to, let's say, supposedly cure cancer, well, it behooves them to create special relationships and an institutional structure of some sort that basically enshrines that cancer is real and the cure for cancer is not. And the way that they do that is by always pursuing something that they've tried before, which is to cure cancer through attack.
Well, and isn't it interesting? Radiation can cause cancer, and they use radiation to
check
cure,
for it.
To cure cancer.
Yeah, to cure it and to also examine mammograms as radiation.
Right. So, there's a lot of that happens in this world, and it seems, logical, but there's a lot of fallacies there. Paragraph 15. The ego makes no attempt to understand this, and it is clearly not understandable. Paragraph 15. The ego makes no attempt to understand this, and it is clearly not understandable. But the ego does make every attempt to demonstrate it, and this it does constantly. Analyzing to attack meaning, the ego succeeds in overlooking it and is left with a series of fragmented perceptions which it unifies on behalf of itself. This then becomes the universe it perceives. And it is this universe which, in turn, becomes its demonstration of its own reality.
You take World War I, World War II, these are all banker wars. They're not conflicts between groups of people or political nation states. They're all designed in boardrooms, and they get people to sign on, and they might as well be dam building projects or bridge building projects. A war is a way of destroying some sort of an integrity in an integrous whole.
Fragmenting it.
It fragments it. It busts it into pieces, breaks it into fragments, and those fragments then are guided back down together into a form desired by the banking establishment. These banker wars, they're economic, social structure projects. And social structure is just another way to reorganize, material flows, money flows, power flows, so that when there's a general approach to war is to bust up, fragment existing power structures.
Right. It's like order out of chaos. They like to reorder things out of the chaos and to their new structure.
So if you want to know how it works, go out, get a hammer and a cinder block, and just tap and tap and tap. Not really hard. Just keep tapping the same spot on that cinder block, and you will break it into pieces. And if you keep on tapping and tapping and tapping on those pieces, they will break up into more and more pieces. And then if you're if you imagine those as being nation states that have their own inner integrity of some sort, and then through fear and conflict and fake terror events and whatnot, it's broken into pieces, then you can reorganize them into what you want with a different kind of glue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a very messy process, but it's the one that's used. So that's what it's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Paragraph 16. Do not underestimate the appeal of the ego's demonstrations to those who would listen. Selective perception chooses its witnesses carefully, and its witnesses are consistent. The case for insanity is strong to the insane, for reasoning ends at its beginning, and no thought system transcends its source. Yet reasoning without meaning cannot demonstrate anything, and those who are convinced by it must be deluded. Can the ego teach truly when it overlooks truth? Can it perceive what it has denied? Its witnesses do attest to its denial, but hardly to what it has denied. The ego looks straight at the Father and does not see him, for it has denied his Son.
So, I mean, it says for reasoning ends at its beginning, and no thought system transcends its source. So, I mean,
reasoning ends at the beginning of insanity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yet reasoning without meaning cannot demonstrate anything. Those who are convinced by it must be deluded. Can the ego teach truly when it overlooks truth? Yeah. I mean, it's constantly seducing us into its world that error is truth and truth is error, so that it can continue with that, keeping me locked into that the world in which I perceive is the real world, and the other is just some airy-fairy idea of myself.
Well, in terms of the United States, as an example, when people got on their covered wagons and came out west and set up little towns and all this kind of thing, you couldn't talk them into working in a factory. They wouldn't touch a factory with a 10-foot pole. That had to be that insanity of giving up fresh air, the farm, honest work, and the fruit of your labor and the vagaries of nature. In order to accomplish that, they seduced people into factories. It's not something they really wanted to do. They actually, literally, with women, with these sort of like these sweatshop sewing things, they had to actually bring in theater troupes to entertain them while they were sewing. They wouldn't stay there.
Wow.
So
I did not know that.
we don't want to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we have been convinced over time that it's really smart to spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day in a box working for someone else, getting pieces of paper that you spend most of on rent, water, electricity. We're a long way from building our cabin with our hands and growing a few crops and living next to a stream and enjoying God's nature, or whatever that is, with whatever dangers and risks might be there.
Right. Yes.
Can the ego teach truly when it overlooks the truth? Can it perceive what is denied? It's denied the truth. It's denied God. It's denied the mind of God. Its witnesses do attest to the denial. The witnesses being fear, panic, anger, whatever those are, the witnesses that come out of that denial there's many, and they're just lined up.
Yeah.
But the ego then reinterprets what those witnesses are witnessing. They're witnessing a series of problems that need to be solved. But they're not that you have denied the mind of God or the truth.
Right, and which ultimately ends up with the denial of my true self, his Son. Okay. Yeah.
And that was why I went into the thing about the covered wagons and the people out west, because we eventually have gotten to a point to where it is sane to do the insane. At one time, it would have been insane to sit in a room 8 hours, 12 hours a day and work for somebody else. It would have been crazy. So my point of all that is that we have reworked our minds into what would have been considered absolute insanity in another era, in another place of freedom that we had gained. and then it has to be taken away from you slowly, slowly. So the forces of insanity are constant and useful for people who want to break up societies, reorganize things another way. We do the same thing in our own lives.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Paragraph 17. Would you remember the Father? Accept his Son, and you will remember him. Nothing can demonstrate that his Son is unworthy, for nothing can prove that a lie is true. What you see of his Son through the eyes of the ego is a demonstration that his Son does not exist. Yet where the Son is, the Father must be. Accept what God does not deny, and it will demonstrate its truth. Accept what God does not deny, and it will demonstrate its truth. The witnesses for God stand in his light and behold what he created. Their silence is the sign that they have beheld God's Son, and in the presence of Christ, they need demonstrate nothing. For Christ speaks to them of himself and of his Father. They are silent because Christ speaks to them, and it is his words they speak.
I've got to get some forms on this. What are we talking about? What are these witnesses that are silent?
Well, the witnesses of God's Son would be, my understanding is the witnesses are going to come back to me as what I gave out, which meant the extensions, because to give and receive, according to the Course, is the same. So whenever God's extension through me as a spark that goes out to another in the world, it will come back to me, because it always it circulates as I give, so I receive. They're the same. So those would be the witnesses. That's my understanding, is that those witnesses are the same as the extensions that I either allowed go through me because I'm not in my fear-based.
Why are they silent? Why don't they say something?
Well, because we're talking about what we would call, for me, eternal principles versus form principles, things of form. So they look and feel like something is coming back at me that actually lights on my mind and brings me joy, let's say, because I extended joy in some form or manner to another or into the world.
Okay, what you see of his Son through the eyes of the ego is a demonstration that his Son does not exist. That's clear to me, because it's saying that when I look at my brothers and I see fragmentation, flaws, threats, that's proof that the sonship is false, okay,
right.
To me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, continuing, yet where the Son is, the Father must be. So regardless of what I'm perceiving, the Father is there, okay? The sonship exists whether I perceive it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So accept what God does not deny, and it will demonstrate its truth. Okay,
God does not deny that you're his Son.
Well, and he does not deny that those people that I'm looking at that are either a threat or something repugnant, he's not denying that he is there. He's not saying,
Mm-hmm.
I am not there. That
right.
So accept what God does not deny, and it will demonstrate its truth. Now, this I have to take on faith, or the idea that I am in a coherent reality. Reality is coherent. Therefore, if I'm looking at something, it's God's creation. It was not manifested out of the ego's
made
constructs.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I can interpret it according to egoic constructs, it is, and it just is. We're very zen in this. Accept what God does not deny, and it will demonstrate its truth. So what I do is I just look at reality as it is, without challenging whether it exists or issuing judgments to it. Accept what God does not, and it will demonstrate its truth. In other words, if I let something be as it is, it will demonstrate its truth. Mm-hmm. Then the witnesses for God stand in his light and behold what he created. So the witnesses for God. And that's going to be the sonship that I look at.
Yes.
In his light, and they behold what he has created. Their silence is the sign that they have beheld God's Son. And in the presence of Christ, okay, they need demonstrate nothing. Okay, so there's no, in other words, what is requires no proof at all. So we're back to, I think it's called I don't know if it's the Lotus Sutra or whatever it is, where someone asked Buddha, by what authority do you teach these things?
Mm-hmm.
Buddha said nothing, and he simply touched the ground.
Mm.
So that's the witness.
Mm-hmm.
Buddha provided the witness of, I touched the ground, meaning, and there are discourses and exegesis on this whole thing about what was he doing? By touching the ground, he's saying, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. That is the witness. The witness is that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only witness you'll ever get from God, do you understand? God's not going to come out with a sign plastered on him and say, here, I am the Almighty God. Mm-hmm. It's always going to be, it's here, it is. That's it. Now, the ego is the one that makes the...
Now, I'm just going to go back, and because didn't Jesus draw something in the ground? Was that the stoning of the woman?
They said, how this woman's been caught with a guy, so we should stone her, right? That's what the law says. And Jesus is drawing while all of this is going on. And he looks up and only says, or maybe while he was drawing, he says, sure, any one of you that hasn't sinned, you throw the first rock. Mm-hmm. You throw the first. So, and then they went away unhappy. Why? Because they had enough integrity to recognize he was correct. They had enough integrity to recognize that they weren't perfect. Thank God for the woman,
right, that
there wasn't some clown among them who said, hey, I've never sinned, and he hurls a rock and starts the process.
Mm-hmm. What is true always. And so Jesus brings, in that instance, a truth that cannot be denied.
They are silent because Christ speaks to them, and it is his words they speak. In other words, silence is the only witness you're going to get. Mm-hmm. You're lucky you get some miracles in this process. You're lucky that the Holy Spirit is going to throw some miracles at you, which seem to have a voice.
Right.
A miracle seems to have a voice. It's a turnaround of a mentality. It's a good feeling where there was a bad feeling. That's nice. Mm-hmm. But typically, there is no talk, there is no description. It is what it is. God's world is what it is. And in the silence of Jesus, when he was stripped and interrogated, he said nothing. Mm-hmm. He said nothing because, listen, you either look at what I did, you look at what I am, you look at this situation, and you call it yourself, man. You call it yourself. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to help you out on this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it seems to me.
That's what it seems to me as well.
Paragraph 18. Every brother you meet becomes a witness for Christ or for the ego, depending on what you perceive in him. Everyone convinces you of what you want to perceive and of the reality of the kingdom you have chosen for your vigilance. Everything you perceive as a witness to the thought system you want to be true. Every brother has the power to release you if you choose to be free. You cannot accept false witness of him unless you have evoked false witnesses against him. If he speaks not of Christ to you, you spoke not of Christ to him. You hear but your own voice, and if Christ speaks through you, you will hear him.
So again, that's what I was speaking of earlier about, witnesses. They come at me by the which I chose. Did I choose Christ to see my brother as myself, or did I choose my ego to do some kind of comparison or judgment of another, that he is my other?
There is no advertising agency to sell me on God's reality. There will not be, there never will be, and as long as I'm looking for it in terms of the miraculous parking angels, wonderful golden moments of uplifted spirit.
Yeah.
Whatever it is I'm looking for as an ad agency to convince me that God is real, I am out of luck. If I'm looking for an ad agency, the ego's got me.
Well, that's true. And there are many times when extensions, interestingly enough, a lot of it has to do with the whole give and receive thing, but extensions of God through me, I may not see those witnesses for months, years, or whatever. I may not even recognize it because, first of all, I don't even know how to receive it. I wouldn't even know that it had any effect, the extension that came.
It just said it. You can just jump right to it.
Yeah.
Zero it out.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Right, you don't.
Every brother you meet becomes either a witness for Christ or for the ego. It depends on what you perceive. Mm-hmm. And what I perceive has to do with the thought system I bring to that situation.
Right.
So the Course in this paragraph is beautifully and, I might say, terrifyingly, giving me absolute freedom to determine what reality I live in. You live in heaven,
or do you live
in hell. So you think you can tell?
Yes, exactly. Heaven from hell. Right.
So I guess that's it.
I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.